If you've ever been called cold, distant, or impossible to reach, this isn't a flaw. Carl Jung identified patterns in human psychology that help explain this. Your strange behaviors aren't damage. They're a secret language of survival. And being unreachable? That's a defense mechanism so advanced, most people will never understand it. Here's the twist everyone misses. What looks like distance is actually a filter. What seems like coldness is strategic protection. And those behaviors people call strange? Jung's work helps us recognize them as signs of someone who finally learned that their empathy is a gift, not a public resource. You know what it's like to be called too much and not enough in the same breath. People say you're cold when you're protecting yourself. They call you distant when you're choosing who deserves access. And let's be honest, this destroys your reputation. People talk, they say you've changed, that you're not the same person anymore. And they're right, you're not. Because you finally woke up. The world demands access to empaths 24/7, but you slam that door shut. Why? Because you snapped. Not with screaming or drama. You snapped internally. The part of you that absorbed everyone's chaos just stopped accepting deposits. And that moment changed everything. Carl Jung spent decades studying psychological types, developing what became known as psychological typology. One type he identified was the introverted intuitive. These individuals possess heightened perceptual abilities that most people don't develop. They perceive patterns others completely miss. They read emotional atmospheres before entering a room. They sense dishonesty behind polite smiles. They detect psychological manipulation the moment it starts. Building on Jung's framework, we can identify what modern observers might call a self-protective pattern in highly sensitive individuals. What society labels as antisocial behavior actually represents sophisticated psychological discernment operating at a level most people can't access. The unreachable empath isn't being difficult, they're being strategic. Jung's work reveals something crucial. What the world sees as coldness often represents conscious withdrawal from what he called collective unconsciousness. The empath looked at how people operate, at the lies everyone agrees to tell, at the performance everyone puts on, and made a choice. Reality over comfort, truth over belonging. And that choice makes you look like the problem. Here's what people really mean when they call you hard to reach. You won't perform anymore. You won't pretend shallow conversation has meaning. You won't laugh at jokes that aren't funny. You won't validate people's victim stories when you can see they're choosing their suffering. You see through the social theater and you refuse to participate in collective play. The world has always demanded emotional labor from empaths. Families want support without appreciation. Friends want therapy without reciprocation. Partners want understanding without offering any themselves. And for years, the empath provided it all, until they realized they were being systematically drained by people who wouldn't cross the street to help them. That's the setup. That's the confrontation Jung documented through his observations of human psychology. The empath who gave everything, until there was nothing left. But here's where the story gets interesting. Here's where we see the transformation begin. Let's examine a composite case profile that demonstrates patterns consistent with Jung's observations of the introverted intuitive type. Consider someone who functioned as the emotional shock absorber for everyone around them. They took calls at midnight. They cancelled their plans to handle other people's emergencies. They absorbed rage, grief, anxiety, depression. They carried weight that was never theirs to carry. Their phone rang constantly because everyone knew they'd answer. Their shoulder was always available. Their energy was treated like a public utility that never needed maintenance or rest. And they kept giving, because that's what empaths do, until something shifted. Not gradually, all at once. They realized their empathy had been weaponized. People weren't seeking support, they were seeking permission to stay stuck. They wanted validation that their problems were someone else's fault. They wanted an audience for their drama. And the empath realized they'd been cast in a play they never auditioned for. That realization triggered what we might understand through Jung's concept of shadow integration. The moment when the empath's shadow, all those denied aspects of self, demanded to be acknowledged. And that's when the strange behaviors started. That's when the unreachable empath pattern emerged. The first strange behavior we observe in this pattern is what many call the vanishing act. The empath disappears for days, sometimes weeks. No explanation, no apology, just silence. Text messages sit unread, calls go to voicemail, invitations get ignored, and everyone who had unlimited access suddenly feels what the empath felt for years. Invisible. People panic when this happens. They accuse the empath of being selfish, rude, or mentally unstable. They say the empath has changed, like it's an accusation. And they're absolutely right. The empath has changed. They stopped sacrificing themselves on the altar of everyone else's comfort. But here's what Jung's understanding of introversion helps us see. This vanishing act isn't depression. It's not a breakdown. It's what we might call psychological decompression. The empath is scrubbing their psyche clean of everyone else's energy. They're separating what belongs to them from what they absorbed from the world. They're sitting in silence and asking a question they should have asked years ago. What do I actually feel when I'm not feeling what everyone else needs me to feel? Think of a computer running too many programs simultaneously. Eventually, it crashes or needs a hard reset. That's the vanishing act. It's the empath system rebooting after years of overload. And the people who get angry about it? Empaths aren't broken. They're alchemists in progress. The Alchemist's Path gives you drills, Jung-based boundaries, and 3 exclusive chapter videos to turn overwhelm into clarity. By Surreal Mind, 236-page downloadable ebook, in stock. Begin now at thesurrealmind.com. They're usually the ones who benefited most from the empath's constant availability. This behavior looks like withdrawal, but through a Jungian lens, we can understand it as reclamation. The empath is reclaiming their energy, their time, their psychic space, and that reclamation is non-negotiable. Now this leads directly into the second strange behavior, and this is where people really start labeling the empath as problematic. The unreachable empath develops absolute intolerance for small talk. Ask them how they're doing, and you might get silence. Try to fill air with meaningless pleasantries and watch them check out completely. Their eyes glaze over. They give one-word answers. They find excuses to exit the conversation. To people who live on surfaces, this looks incredibly rude. But we can understand this through Jung's insights about the intuitive type's relationship with surface-level interaction. The unreachable empath sees the lie behind polite conversation. They recognize that most people asking how you are don't actually care about the answer. They're following a social script. The script says ask, they say fine, you say fine back. Everyone pretends this is connection, but it's not connection, it's performative noise. And once you see the script, you cannot unsee it. You cannot participate in collective theater anymore. It feels like wearing a mask that's cutting into your face. Your energy drains from holding the performance, so instead of faking engagement, the unreachable empath simply refuses to participate. These individuals aren't being difficult, they're being efficient. They've calculated the energy cost of fake interaction and decided it's not worth the price. Every shallow conversation depletes them. Every forced smile drains their battery. Every polite laugh at an unfunny joke costs something they can't afford anymore. So they conserve energy for interactions that actually matter, for conversations that go beneath surface level, for people willing to be real instead of performing normalcy. And if that means most conversations don't happen, that's a price they'll pay gladly. This creates a natural bridge to the third behavior, and this one disturbs observers the most because it looks like the empath became heartless. The unreachable empath can watch someone cry and feel absolutely nothing. They can sit across from a manipulator having a breakdown and remain completely unmoved. They can hear a sob story that would have destroyed them a year ago and feel only mild curiosity about why this person thinks emotional manipulation will work. This appears cold, cruel even, like the empath lost their soul somewhere in their transformation. But we can understand this through what modern psychology calls selective empathy. The empath didn't lose their ability to care. They learned to regulate the flow. They learned the difference between genuine pain and performative suffering. And once you learn that difference, you cannot unknow it. Let's look at a narrative illustration based on patterns consistent with Jung's observations of psychological development. Picture someone who spent their entire life feeling everything. Every tragedy on the news, every piece of pain that crossed their path. They cried for strangers. They lost sleep over other people's problems. They felt guilty having good days when someone somewhere was suffering. Then slowly, they noticed something. The people crying loudest were often manipulating hardest. The ones claiming victim status were frequently causing the most damage. The ones demanding the most emotional support gave the least. The person calling in crisis every week about the same problem refused every solution offered. They didn't want help. They wanted an audience. So the empath made a choice. They stopped automatically dispensing emotional energy to everyone who asked. They started watching behavior instead of just listening to words. And when they saw manipulation dressed as suffering, they shut down, not because they stopped caring about real pain, because they learned to identify fake pain instantly. This represents what Jung described as shadow integration in action. The empath accepted the uncomfortable truth that not everyone deserves their compassion, that tears can be weapons, that vulnerability can be tactical, that protecting yourself from manipulation doesn't make you bad, it makes you wise. And once they crossed that threshold, there was no going back. They couldn't return to the innocent version who believed everyone claiming to hurt. They'd seen behind the curtain. They knew how the trick worked. Which brings us naturally to the fourth behavior. And this is the one that makes people call the unreachable empath absolutely cold-blooded. We might describe this as radical removal, though Jung himself would have understood it through his concept of necessary psychological boundaries. When the unreachable empath decides you're toxic, they don't argue. They don't try fixing you. They don't give multiple chances. They don't have the big confrontation listing everything you did wrong. They just delete you from their life, like you never existed. No explanation, no closure, just silence. This terrifies people because it's so permanent. We live in a culture worshipping second chances. We're told everyone deserves to be heard, that ghosting is cruel, that you owe people explanations. But the unreachable empath moved beyond that belief system. They learned some people never change, that explaining yourself to someone refusing to understand wastes breath. That closure is something you give yourself, not something you get from others. We can examine this through another composite example based on observable psychological patterns. Consider someone who realizes their friend has been undermining them for years. Backhanded compliments, competitive energy disguised as support, small betrayals accumulating over time, broadcasting failures while minimizing successes, making them the joke in group settings, death by 1,000 cuts. Most people would confront this, have the big talk, list grievances, try salvaging the friendship because that's what you're supposed to do. But the unreachable empath sees deeper truth. Confrontation won't change anything. The underminer won't suddenly transform. They'll deny, make excuses, Or flip it so the empath becomes the bad guy for noticing. So the empath just stops responding. They don't block. They don't make announcements. They become unavailable. Texts sit unread. Calls go to voicemail. And when the person finally notices and asks what happened, the empath offers nothing. Because people who genuinely cared would have noticed their impact long before you disappeared. If you must explain why they hurt you, they didn't care enough to pay attention in the first place. The door slam is final because it must be. The empath knows any opening will be exploited, any explanation will be weaponized, any vulnerability shown becomes ammunition, so they offer nothing, just vanish, and that finality sends a message louder than words ever could. This connects directly to the fifth and final behavior pattern, and this one confuses everyone who thinks they understand healthy social connection. The unreachable empath avoids so-called normal people like they're carrying a contagion. Birthday parties feel like psychological warfare. Networking events are torture. Casual group hangouts drain them for days. Office parties make them physically ill. Family gatherings feel like emotional minefields. And everyone asks the same question. Why can't you just relax and have fun like everyone else? Jung's understanding of the shadow provides insight here. The unreachable empath senses what we might call the shadow of the group. They feel unspoken tensions humming beneath surface chatter. They notice fake laughter and forced enthusiasm. They see people performing versions of themselves that don't match their actual energy. They watch people pretending to like each other while radiating resentment. They feel the collective agreement to ignore everything real, to maintain the illusion of normalcy. Being in that environment feels like drowning in collective dishonesty. Every smile that doesn't reach the eyes registers as a lie. Every forced conversation feels like a performance they're expected to validate. Every moment of fake connection reminds them most people prefer pretense over reality. It's not that they hate fun. They can't call what everyone else is doing fun. They can't pretend shallow interaction equals connection. They can't ignore undercurrents of jealousy, competition, judgment, and resentment pulsing through every group dynamic. And once you see how much energy people waste maintaining social masks, you can't participate without feeling sick. So they choose solitude, not because they're broken or antisocial, because being alone feels more honest than being surrounded by people lying to themselves and each other. Now, we can understand the mechanism powering all 5 behaviors through what modern psychology recognizes as advanced pattern recognition. The unreachable empath has watched the same movie repeat so many times they know the ending from the opening scene. Someone love bombs with attention. Red flag. Genuine interest builds slowly. Someone plays victim while never taking accountability. Red flag. Perpetual victims choose. They're suffering. Someone tests boundaries, pushing incrementally. Red flag. People respecting boundaries don't test them. Most people give benefit of the doubt, tell themselves maybe this time is different. But the unreachable empath learned patterns repeat, because people don't change unless forced to, and they're not interested in forcing anyone's growth. They'd rather leave the theater early. They've seen the ending too many times. The love bomber becomes controlling. The perpetual victim becomes an energy vampire. The boundary tester becomes an abuser. They don't need to watch the third act. They can predict it from scene 1. And this ability to see patterns makes them look cynical to people still pretending patterns don't exist. But it's not cynicism. It's wisdom earned through pain. This brings us to the climax of the unreachable empath's journey. And this is the moment that changes everything. This is where victim transforms into warrior, where weakness becomes power, where the person everyone thought was broken reveals they were actually becoming whole. There comes a singular moment when the unreachable empath stops seeing their nature as a defect requiring correction. They stop apologizing for boundaries. They stop trying to be more accessible to comfort others. They stop explaining why they need space, why they don't answer immediately, why they say no. This moment reflects what Jung called individuation, the process of becoming your complete authentic self, especially the parts society rejects. And this isn't a quiet realization. This is a psychological earthquake. Everything the empath thought they knew about themselves shatters and rebuilds in a new configuration. They look at their so-called flaws and see features. They look at their distance and see protection. They look at their selectivity and see wisdom. This is the victory everyone told them was defeat. This is the breakthrough everyone called a breakdown, because the unreachable empath realizes something that detonates their entire previous worldview. Their distance isn't a flaw. It's a filter working exactly as designed. It keeps toxic people out. It protects their energy from vampires who would drain them dry and demand more. It ensures only people genuinely respecting them get access. And once they see it this way, they can never unsee it. The shame evaporates. The apologies stop. The explanations end. They stop defending their choices to people determined to misunderstand. They stop caring whether people get them or not. Because the right people won't need explanations. They'll respect boundaries and either step up or step back. Clean, clear, no drama. And the wrong people reveal themselves immediately. They guilt trip. They call the empath selfish. They make demands disguised as requests. They push and test and manipulate, seeking cracks in the wall. And every attempt confirms the wall was necessary. The unreachable empath becomes a mirror reflecting truth. If you're authentic, you feel safe around them. You appreciate their directness. You value their boundaries because you have your own. But if you're performing, if you're manipulating, you feel exposed, uncomfortable. You want to escape or destroy their credibility, so you don't have to look at what they're reflecting. That's not the empath's fault. That's your discomfort with being seen clearly. Here's where Jung's insight reaches its peak. His work suggests that psychological wholeness doesn't require everyone to be accessible or reachable. What matters is alignment. Aligned with your truth, with your values, with your actual energy instead of who you think you should be. The unreachable empath's distance is their power, not a defense born purely from trauma, though trauma may have awakened it. It's evolutionary adaptation. They're learning to exist in a world not built for people who see too much and feel too deeply. And instead of breaking themselves to fit, they're building their own world, with their own rules, where depth trumps breadth, quality trumps quantity, truth trumps comfort. This is the lesson most people miss. You owe no one access to you, not family, despite blood ties justifying unlimited demands. Not friends, despite calling you bad for having boundaries. Not partners, despite confusing enmeshment with intimacy. Access to you is privilege, not right. And when you treat it that way, everything reorganizes around your truth. People who can't handle boundaries leave. Good. They were never your people. They wanted the version that didn't exist. That said yes, meaning no. That stayed when you should have left. That gave until nothing remained but resentment. The ones who stay will actually see you and value what you bring, not what you do for them, not how you make them feel. You in your authentic, unreachable glory. And that small circle of real connection nourishes more than 1,000 shallow relationships ever could. Here's what the unreachable empath knows that others don't. Loneliness isn't being alone. It's being surrounded by people who don't actually know you. You can stand in a crowded room of so-called friends and feel utterly isolated because everyone's interacting with your mask, not the person underneath. That's real loneliness. But when you're alone and aligned with yourself, that's not loneliness. That's peace. That's integrity. That's what Jung meant by the individuated self. You become whole by accepting all of yourself, including parts making you incompatible with surface dwellers. The unreachable empath moved from victim to warrior. They're not hiding. They're strategically unavailable, not cold, selective, not damaged, discerning. And people who can't tell the difference don't deserve closeness anyway. Jung spent his life mapping psychological territories not to create fear, but to create freedom. Freedom from unconscious manipulation, freedom from projection, freedom from being recruited into other people's dramas. The most dangerous psychological state isn't being unreachable. It's being too available, too accessible, too willing to absorb everyone's chaos while neglecting your own needs. That's the state that destroys people. That creates the conditions for the psychological breaking point we've been discussing. But when you become unreachable consciously, when you choose it, instead of having it forced on you, you become psychologically resilient. You can't be manipulated because you see it coming. You can't be gaslit because you trust your perceptions. You can't be drained because you control the flow. Your unreachable nature protects you from people and situations that would consume you. It keeps you safe from manipulation, exploitation, and energy theft. It ensures your life fills with people who earned their place, not people who manipulated their way in. Yes, it costs relationships, makes you look difficult to people used to easy access, makes you seem cold to people used to warmth without boundaries, makes you appear antisocial to people confusing performance with connection. But here's what you gain: self-respect, energy, clarity, authenticity, a life built around your actual values instead of other people's expectations. The world told you being unreachable is a problem needing therapy. Jung's work suggests otherwise. It reveals patterns showing that this represents someone who learned life's hardest lessons, that you can't save everyone, that trying destroys you, that you can't fix people who don't want fixing, that your empathy is a gift to be given wisely, not scattered like it's worthless. You're not broken for being hard to reach. You're evolved. You graduated from people-pleasing and enrolled in self-preservation. And people who have a problem with that usually benefited from the old version of you. That version is dead, and the person you are now, the unreachable empath guarding their energy like it's sacred because it is, that's who you were always meant to become. That's the integrated self Jung's work helps us understand and develop. So here's your permission slip, though. You don't need permission from anyone. You don't have to be available. You don't have to explain yourself. You don't have to make yourself smaller, softer, or more palatable to people who wouldn't appreciate you anyway. Your boundaries aren't negotiable. Your energy isn't a public resource. Your empathy isn't something people are entitled to because they want it. Be unreachable. Be selective. Be strategic about who gets access to the real you. Because in a world wanting to consume you, wanting to take until there's nothing left, being unreachable isn't a flaw. It's a superpower. And Jung's work reveals that people who integrate this truth into their being become psychologically powerful. They don't need external validation because they validate themselves. They don't need constant connection because they connected with their own truth. They don't need everyone's understanding because they finally understand themselves. This is the final stage. From the person giving everything to everyone and wondering why they're empty, to the person giving carefully to the few who earned it and feeling full. From the empath destroyed by their gift, to the empath wielding that gift as a weapon of discernment. From victim of their sensitivity to master of their energy. And once you reach this stage, you realize something beautiful. You were never too much. The world was just too small to hold you properly. You were never broken. You were just surrounded by people needing you broken so they could feel whole. You were never the problem. You were just the only one brave enough to stop pretending everything was fine. So instead of shrinking to fit spaces never meant for you, you expanded. Instead of dimming your light so others wouldn't feel overshadowed, you let it burn so bright only the right people could stand to look at it. And those people, the rare ones who can handle your intensity, your depth, your unreachable nature, they're your actual tribe. If you're done apologizing for your boundaries, if you're finished explaining yourself to people who'll never understand, if you're ready to own your unreachable nature as the strength it actually is, then let this be your moment. Like this video and subscribe, because you've just found your people, the ones who get it, the ones who see being unreachable as evolution, not isolation. Thanks for watching. See you in the next dimension. In The Alchemist's Path, perception training for empaths, you'll turn overwhelm into wisdom with practical drills, Jung-inspired boundaries, and step-by-step perception training. This guide includes 3 exclusive chapter videos to deepen each lesson. Written by Surreal Mind, 236 pages, beautifully designed 8.5 by 11 downloadable ebook, in stock now. Start your training today. Feel deeply while thinking clearly. Get The Alchemist's Path at thesurrealmind.com.